here at Providence College, and I am chair of the Jewish Catholic Theological Exchange Committee, which organizes these events. I'd like to welcome you all to today's talk, which is part of our series called Theological Exchange Between Catholics and Jews. Now entering its 6th year, the series is a forum for Jews and Catholics to reflect upon and discuss questions of mutual theological and historical interest, and in the process, learn about and from one another. The series responds to the call of the Second Vatican Council and continues a rich history of Jewish-Christian engagement here at Providence College that goes back to the 1920s, when the sons of Jewish immigrants to America found the doors of this new Catholic college open to them when other institutions held them shut. This afternoon's event begins what will be in our series a 3-year thematic commemoration of 2 important events. The 50th anniversary in the year 2015 of the promulgation of Nostra Aetate, the landmark Catholic declaration that forever directed the relationship between Jews and Catholics, and the centennial of Providence College in 2017. As Pope Francis stated in his recent apostolic exhortation, dialogue and friendship with the children of Israel are part of the life of Jesus' disciples. And over the next 3 years, we will be exploring both the tragic and the hopeful moments of the Jewish-Christian relationship, both globally and locally, through talks, colloquia, and exhibits. And today's talk by Rabbi Rosenberg highlights a Jewish perspective on interreligious dialogue here in Rhode Island in the decades since Vatican II. This afternoon's talk is co-sponsored by the Theology Department and the Center for Catholic and Dominican Studies, and is also made possible by the generous gifts of donors, both Christian and Jewish, who make this a truly interreligious effort. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge our donors today. A special thanks is owed to the Diocese of Providence, Barbara and Edward Feldstein, and Mr. Feldstein is PC class of 1964, Leo Magavero, and Arthur Robbins. Thank you to all of you for your support of this program. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, especially those of you who've come from beyond the gates. We welcome you here on campus, and I'd also like to acknowledge all of the faculty, staff, and students who are here today. Thank you for your presence. I just want to mention one more thing. We have a mailing list. If anyone is interested in receiving emails about upcoming events, there is a yellow pad on the table there. We also have a website on our theology webpage, and we are on Twitter. We're going high-tech now. Let me get the name right here, Jews Catholics PC on Twitter. So you can follow us there as well. All right, we've already got a few dozen followers. So we're racking them up. So at this moment, I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Deborah Johnson from the Art History Department, who will now introduce today's speaker.
It's both a pleasure and a privilege to introduce you to our speaker today, Rabbi James Rosenberg, who will speak to us about the joys and challenges of interreligious dialogue. Rabbi Rosenberg received his BA in philosophy from Columbia University, and after that, his Master's of Hebrew Letters with honors, as well as his rabbinic ordination from Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. In fact, in 1996, he was awarded an honorary doctorate of divinity from Hebrew Union College. It's odd to begin an introduction with a retirement, but in fact, perhaps the most significant episode in Rabbi Rosenberg's life of the past 5 or so years is, I guess it's 7 or 8 years, is his retirement as spiritual leader of Temple Habonim, a liberal Jewish congregation in Barrington, Rhode Island, having served that community for a reasonably unprecedented 33 years. And he continues to serve that community with love and caring as Rabbi Emeritus. The current rabbi of Temple Habonim stands at the back of the hall in support of his colleague. Rabbi Rosenberg has taught courses in Jewish studies, in Holocaust studies, in Zionism, in Jewish mysticism, and Jewish religious thought at Tufts University and at Connecticut College, but he may be more familiar to many of us, at least of late, as a prolific and gifted local author, writer of a biweekly column entitled It Seems to Me, that appears with every issue of the Jewish Voice and Herald, as well as numerous op-ed pieces for the Barrington Times and the Providence Journal. But even closer to his heart, I hope this is true, he has been writing poetry for more than 20 years. And in 2007, he completed a 10-year term as poetry editor of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, Journal of Reform Judaism. Several of his original poems, as well as translations of modern Hebrew poetry, have appeared in national periodicals, and in 2011, Ex Libris published a collection of 121 of his own poems entitled Until the Blue Kingdom Comes. What a wonderful, evocative title, and wonderful interior to those covers. But I think we probably learn most and best about Rabbi Rosenberg from two recent awards he's received. In 2012, he won the Michael P. Metcalf Media Award from the organization Rhode Island for Community and Justice, presented for excellence in fostering understanding and goodwill. And just last week, he received the Reverend Herbert Bowles Life Achievement Award from the Rhode Island State Council of Churches as a hero of faith. In other words, in addition to being a scholar, a teacher, a beloved spiritual leader, Rabbi Rosenberg is that highest of honor in the Jewish world. He's a mensch. A mensch, a Yiddish term connoting a person of integrity, honor, and heart. Please welcome my friend, Rabbi Jim Rosenberg.
I'd like to know who you were talking about. I have to say what I said at the breakfast when I received that award. I told the Rhode Island State Council of Churches officials that I realized what they were doing in a very nice way was confirming the fact that I am now an old man. I turned 70 this past summer, and you can't receive a life achievement until you've lived long enough, so all the younger people who are much more talented just have to go through the years, and then they too can have life achievement. Seeing so many of you here, it's really thrilling. So many of you I know from various places, and many of you I don't know. I see a lot of student faces. I hope I won't give a Mago kind of talk. My eyes glaze over. I used to have to go to some of those, and they were not the happiest part of my college career. I want to start with just a verse from the Psalms. The psalmist sings, Hine ma tov u'manayim shevet achim gam yachad. See how good and how pleasant it is for all of us to come together in harmony, and hopefully after I'm done speaking, we'll have some harmonious, or not, maybe even not so harmonious discussion. Some years ago, I found myself sitting in a nursing home with a member of my synagogue and his dying mother. As I got up, having said shalom to his mother for the final time, he called to me in a barely audible voice, Rabbi, I wish I had your faith. As I have reflected upon this encounter, I have come to understand that my congregant's comment was not as much of a statement as a question, or more precisely, a series of questions. What is the nature of your faith, Rabbi? How have you arrived at this faith? And finally, why can't I myself also be a person of faith? As I have continued to reflect upon these issues of personal belief, I've come to realize how difficult it is for me to answer these first two questions. What is the nature of my faith? And how have I come to believe what I believe? The more I ponder these questions, the more I realize how absurd it is that I happen to be standing here this afternoon as a rabbi speaking of interfaith matters at a Catholic college. Now, I'm not using the word absurd in its primary meaning of ridiculous or preposterous or irrational or just plain silly. No, I'm using the term absurd in its existential meaning of that feeling of being thrown into a situation by an accident of fate. It is absurd in this existentialist sense that I happen to have been carried for 9 months in a Jewish womb. My mother could just as easily have been a Catholic or a Methodist or a Buddhist or a Shinto or a Bantu or an Australian Aborigine for that matter. It is by an accident of fate that I find myself speaking to you as a Jew. Were it not for this accident of fate, I never would have become a rabbi. But who knows, perhaps in some other life, I might have become a priest, or a minister, or a medicine man. To begin to put the pieces of my personal existential puzzle together, let me draw for you a mental picture, a visual metaphor that expresses my personal view as to how I, as an individual Jew, fit in among the world's major religions. In this vision, in this metaphor, I see each religious community encamped at the base of a towering mountain. We Jews are here, Catholics here, just beyond them are the Protestants, the other side, Muslims, the other side of the mountain, Hindus and Buddhists. We really can't see the Hindus and the Buddhists because they're on the opposite side of the mountain, but we know they're there. Now, the mountain's craggy peak, capped with snow, represents ultimate religious truth. But the peak is so high, so remote, that it remains forever beyond human reach. Nevertheless, over the course of centuries, gifted religious leaders have managed to blaze trails climbing towards the summit. Each trail ascends from the base camp of a particular religious community. So there's a Jewish trail, a Muslim trail, Hindu trail, a Catholic trail. You get the picture. Because of the efforts of these trailblazers, all of those with the strength and interest can leave the base camp and make their way upward along a well-marked trail. The higher the individual climbs, the clearer the vision of the peak, even though the top of the peak, the summit, will ultimately remain beyond our reach. Now, from time to time, a few exceptionally brave and hardy souls move beyond the trails blazed by tradition. They struggled upon uncharted and dangerous heights as they inched their way towards the unassailable summit. I've carried this vision of the mountain of faith within me for many decades, and the metaphor has pushed me to several conclusions. To begin with, from my perspective, no one religious tradition is in possession of the truth. Ultimate religious truth is not attainable because of the undeniable fact that none of us in this room happen to be God. The finite can never grasp the infinite. Moreover, even when a person has toiled far up the trail of his own tradition, his or her vision of the peak is at best only partial, for it is limited by the angle of one's approach. Hindus, ascending the mountain from the opposite side, necessarily see God differently than I do as a Jew. Interreligious dialogue, then, can never be a debate in which members of one team attempt to score points over their opponents. True dialogue is characterized by a willingness to listen with sympathy and openness to the accounts of those who have taken different paths to God. Now, if Judaism is not any truer than any other historically tested world religion, why have I chosen to remain Jewish? As I've already stated, I am Jewish because of an existential absurdity. I am Jewish because I happen to be born of Jewish parents. Nevertheless, I have chosen to give meaning to this accident of my birth by climbing the trail towards the summit of religious truth blazed by my fellow Jews during almost 4,000 years of collective experience and wrestling with God. The blood, sweat, and tears of former generations have made my climb far less strenuous. However, because I have of my own free will committed myself to a Jewish path, I'm never going to be able to see the summit from the perspective of a committed Catholic, or a committed Protestant, or a committed Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu. My vision is neither more true nor less true than the vision of those of you who have chosen other paths. But my vision is necessarily different from yours, conditioned as it is by my own people's ongoing search for God. A further observation: no religious tradition is monolithic. The view from the base camp, which most people elect to remain, where most people elect, let me get my word soup straightened out. The view from the base camp, where most people choose to remain, is far less clear than the unobstructed view of the peak from above the tree line. To bring this metaphor into the sociology of religion, there are low cultural traditions as well as high cultural traditions. In interreligious dialogue, participants have the best chance of getting to understand each other if they find themselves at roughly the same distance from their respective base camps. That is to say, participants in meaningful interfaith dialogue should be at similar stages of spiritual and intellectual development. Thus, a sophisticated Hindu would have little to say to an uneducated Muslim, and vice versa. Speaking personally, I communicate best with Christian colleagues who have had a similar amount of education. Finally, as we seekers move closer to the summit, our paths begin to converge. Think of how a mountain works. You get closer to each other as you get closer to the top. Well, at this point, communication can become much deeper and much richer. It becomes increasingly dangerous for us seekers because we could well lose our footing at such a high altitude. Now, obviously, a metaphor is only a metaphor. A metaphor lacks the compelling force of pure logic. Nevertheless, my personal vision of this mountain of faith has enabled me to listen and to learn from those whose approach to the summit of religious truth is far different from the path I have chosen. This metaphor of the mountain of faith has informed my participation in interfaith dialogue during my 40 years of living here in Rhode Island, and especially during the 33 years that I served as rabbi at Temple Habonim in Barrington. During those years before my retirement in the summer of 2007, I was involved in 3 principal forms of interfaith activity. On the most local level, the Barrington Clergy Association. Then I also belonged to a statewide group of rabbis, Protestant ministers, and Catholic priests, as well as a bilateral rabbi-priest discussion group. When I first came to Temple Habonim, which was then known as Barrington Jewish Center, in the summer of 1974, my understanding of organized Christianity was primitive, to say the least. My mindset at that time was that Barrington was a town of few Jews and many Christians. I blush now at how incredibly oblivious I was back then. In those days, to my way of thinking, there was almost no difference between Protestants and Catholics. After all, you're all Christians, right? What difference could it make? Needless to say, it did not take the local Protestant and Catholic religious leaders very long to disabuse me of my profound naivete. While I will never presume to take sides on issues which divide Catholics and Protestants, I have not hesitated to highlight over the years 4 issues which I believe cry out for dialogue between Christians and Jews. The first issue, and in many ways the most obvious, is theological. As far as I can tell as an outsider looking in, one cannot be a Christian unless one understands Jesus to be, in some sense, the Christ, the Messiah. The religion is, after all, called Christianity. By way of contrast, while many of us Jews do accept Jesus as having a significant role in Jewish history, we cannot affirm the divinity of Jesus except in the limited sense that there is a divine spark in each of us. A second area that calls for ongoing discussion is the matter of proselytism, the matter of Christians trying to pressure Jews into converting. This, to me, is clearly a case of the irresistible force meeting the immovable object. Simply put, not surprisingly, we Jews don't want Christians trying to convert us. On the other hand, I do understand that to this very day, some Christians continue to insist that they're actually doing us Jews a favor by bringing us to Christ and thereby to eternal life. I would like to share with you a personal experience which illustrates how some Christians simply can't let go of their missionary fervor. Almost every spring during my years in Barrington, I organized an interfaith adult education class of 4 to 6 evenings on a mutually agreed upon topics such as Easter and Passover, the parting of the ways, or human sexuality, or the Holocaust, or the Book of Revelation, or the quest for the historical Jesus. As these classes rotated from the town's churches and my synagogue, the town's clergy would take turns as being teacher for the evening. At the conclusion of the 6th and final session of our interfaith exploration of the life of Jesus, a woman from one of the local churches came up to me and sweetly asked, "I've really enjoyed studying with you, but tell me, Rabbi, Why can't you accept our Lord? Briefly stunned, I recovered with, looking straight in her eyes, for the same reason I can't be a woman. A third area that I have found demands continuing dialogue concerns the different ways in which Jewish and Christian traditions, broadly understood, look at the notions of law and love. I have developed the following formulation to help explain this relationship, certainly not as the last word on the subject, but rather as a discussion starter. And the way I put it is, for the Christian, love makes law unnecessary. For the Jew, law makes love possible. Let me repeat that. For the Christian, love makes law unnecessary. For the Jew, law makes love possible. Let me unpack just a bit what is admittedly a vast overgeneralization. I confess to that before I'm criticized. At least in some of his letters, his epistles, Paul argues that love, that is agape, not erotic love, supersedes and renders superfluous the need for law, especially certain ritual laws like circumcision. By way of contrast, for the Jew, religious and moral law provide a reliable structure that, despite the inevitable ebb and flow of emotion, enables love to flourish and endure. When the rush of positive feeling begins to slow, Jewish ritual and moral law continue to bind people together through prescribed deeds which demonstrate kindness and concern, deeds which, yes, express love. To review briefly, the role of Jesus as the Christ, matter of proselytism, the dance of law and love have been recurrent themes during my 4 decades in interfaith dialogue. However, by far the most emotionally laden and tension-filled discussions have centered about, not surprisingly, the state of Israel. We Jews do not speak with one voice about Israel. Indeed, if you know anything about our Jewish community, you ought to know that we do not speak with one voice about anything. At this very moment, some American Jews remain highly critical of the Netanyahu's handling of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in general, and of this past summer's Gaza crisis in particular. However, others in our community fully support Israel's current government and argue vociferously that Israel had no choice but to respond with extreme force to the rocket attacks and the potentially lethal network of tunnels aimed at spreading mayhem among Israel's civilian population. Nevertheless, despite our sometimes angry, even ugly disagreements within our community, the vast majority of the world's Jews feel a deep connection with Israel. We are connected with Jewish Israelis by bonds of fate and of faith. It's difficult to overstate the degree to which the existence of Israel infuses Jewish experience and gives us a sense of our collective past, present, and future. Beginning with the 1967 Six-Day War, much of the Jewish community felt misunderstood at best, abandoned at worst by our Christian friends and neighbors, with respect to our complicated and intimate relationship to Israel. Many of us have sensed that Christians do not comprehend our pain and our fear when Israel has been threatened, nor do they fathom why we Jews in America are so emotionally involved with what's happening in a small foreign country on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea. This is a conversation which needs to be continued for the sake of all of us who desire a just and a lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians. As painful as this dialogue is now, and as painful as it is likely to continue to be, it is a dialogue that must be pursued. In addition to these four central themes, that is, the meaning of Jesus as Messiah, proselytism, the love-law connection, and Israel, I've been engaged in a host of other discussions with my Christian colleagues. We've looked closely at each other's sacred texts, the New Testament, the Hebrew Bible. We've grappled with the meaning of divine revelation. Does God speak words? We've struggled with issues of war and peace, and we've cried out for greater social justice in what is supposed to be this land of the free and the home of the brave. During the course of bilateral discussions between rabbis and priests, we zeroed in on topics of a particular interest to Catholics and Jews. What have been the practical implications of the Second Vatican Council? What changes have there been in the intricacies of Vatican politics? What has been the evolving role of papal authority? And it should come as no surprise that we rabbis and priests devoted a number of our luncheon meetings at Temple Emmanuel in Providence to a discussion of anti-Semitism in general and in particular the Holocaust, especially during those years when Father Edward Flannery, author of The Anguish of the Jews, was an active participant. Although I have found my decades-long involvement in interfaith dialogue here in Rhode Island profoundly rewarding, I must confess to areas of disappointment. Thus, despite some limited one-time successes, we Jews and Muslims have so far been unable to achieve our goal of regular, sustained conversations in order to build the kind of trusting relationship that can develop only after years of back and forth conversation. I can only hope that in the months and years ahead, our Rhode Island interfaith community will find a way to include our state's Muslims within the framework of purposeful, ongoing exchange of perspectives. And to speak more generally, I've been saddened to sense in recent years a waning of interest in the interfaith enterprise in general here in Rhode Island. And in speaking with my colleagues from other parts of the country, I am forced to conclude that this lessening of interest in interfaith dialogue is by no means unique to our small state. Perhaps this situation is temporary, part of the natural cycle of the religious communities looking inward and then reaching outward again, not unlike the biological rhythm of breathing in and breathing out. I would like to think that my talk here this afternoon, under the sponsorship of Providence College's Committee on Jewish-Catholic Theological Exchange, represents at least one small step towards more broad-based and continuing conversations among Rhode Island's diverse religious communities. If you've been wondering how my vision of the mountain of faith has served as a controlling metaphor in my interfaith work, you might well conclude that I have painted myself into a theological corner. If I am Jewish because of an accident of fate, if Judaism is in fact no truer than any other historically tested world religion, then why in the world have I spent the better part of my life trying to understand how Judaism fits in with other world religions? Judaism, Catholicism, Protestantism in its many sects, Islam in its varieties, Buddhism, Hinduism and their varieties, if our religious beliefs and practices can be reduced to an existential absurdity of being born into them, to accidents of personal fate, what difference do any of these world religions make? How can we possibly make meaning out of them? If we're willing to probe more deeply into the nature of our lives, we will discover that just about every single particular about us is absurd, again, in the existential sense. Why are some of us born with blue eyes and others with brown eyes? Well, the color of our eyes might not make much difference. Most of the particulars that we inherit will have profound influence upon the future shape of our lives. Are we male or female? Black or white? Intellectually gifted or of average intelligence? Or perhaps mentally retarded? Are we physically robust? Or do we suffer from a sickly constitution? You get the point. We are thrown into this world with a great deal of inherited baggage over which we have little or no control. Nobody is wise enough to choose her parents. Nobody chooses the religious community into which he happens to be born. As it turns out, virtually every aspect of our life is absurd, an existential absurdity from which there is no exit. But we can, at least to some extent, determine our future by choosing how we will respond to the multiple accidents of our birth. Unless we happen to have converted from one religion to another, we have not chosen our religious identity. We have been born into it. Nevertheless, all of us who are here today, if we desire, can choose to make our religious identity a shaping influence in our lives. So, as we draw to the end, let us go back then to the room in that nursing home, where some years ago I'm sitting with a congregant and his dying mother. I wish I had your faith, Rabbi. Only this time, let my congregant address you, each of you, all of you. How do you respond to his implied questions? What is the nature of your faith, if you have any? How have you arrived at your faith? Is your faith an ongoing ascent up a mountain? Even if you sense that you will never reach the summit, will you keep on climbing? Do you acknowledge the existential absurdity of your religious identity, even as you continue to drink from the wellsprings of your religious tradition? As for me, it is precisely because I acknowledge the ultimate absurdity of my Jewish identity that, in addition to drinking from the living waters of my own Jewish tradition, I choose to draw upon the collective experience and wisdom of serious seekers from other religious communities, men and women who are taking equally arduous and equally challenging trails up the mountain of faith. What 40 years of interfaith dialogue has taught me is that mature religious faith is a work in progress, a strife of the spirit that fills us with awe and with energy, and at times, even with ecstasy. A sacred pilgrimage that provides us with the strength and the courage to say yes in the face of no, and to choose life in the face of death. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosenberg. We have some time for questions. There are two microphones, one on either side of the room. Make your way to the microphone if you have a question.
Well, I've had the privilege of, can you hear me? Well, I'll stay. I've had the privilege of moderating some rather tense discussions, and some of the people who have got me involved with this are laughing. There's a great deal of controversy, and I've agreed to moderate these discussions because I believe that what's going on between the Israelis and Palestinians is not a war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. It's a very complicated and nuanced position, and certainly within the Jewish community, I try to talk about what unites us is a great love for Israel, even though we are not clear about how to express that. To expand this to the Palestinian-Israeli discussion, what we all want is a just and a lasting peace, where everyone involved feels secure. The building of the trust is what is so incredibly difficult. And sometimes I think it has to be done brick by brick. I'm involved in a group called J Street, and we've had many Palestinian speakers, and we've had Palestinian and Israeli speakers speaking in the same format. But to be honest, the issues are at best extremely volatile. Sometimes you have to be willing to push like Sisyphus, push the rock up the mountain, and maybe one of these times we'll actually get over. You're asking a question for which I have no real answer other than I go back to Rabbi Tarfon. Lo alecha hamalacha ligmor v'lo ata ben chorin lehivatel mimena. Translation: it's not up to you to finish the task, but you neither do have permission to stop trying. So I'll leave it at that. I wish I could do better. Yes.
Hi, Rabbi. My question just involves, it's pretty much similar. Now that we've all come to hear your interfaith dialogue, where do we go from here? How do we take that message elsewhere? Are there places are there other outlets that just a person could go to that you could involve yourself with interfaith faith dialogue or service?
Now, are you talking specifically about the issues about Israel, or
Not specifically, just interfaith dialogue in general.
Oh, well, I think for people who are interested, you reach out, and I mean, that's how I did it. There was no interfaith activity in Barrington when I came there. I got very interested in it, and I got colleagues to become interested in it, and you build it a little bit at a time, and for a while there was quite a bit of enthusiasm. So if you're interested, you find students who are interested, you find a place where you can meet on a regular basis. I did that also as an undergraduate student at Columbia, long time ago. So for anyone here who is interested and feels you're not getting enough of it, you're the one. Ata ha'ish. You're the one. You've got to start, and you can do it. There are plenty of people. I mean, it's a huge. I started in rabbinic school, asking my teachers, why aren't we being taught anything about Christianity? And the answer was, we don't have time. We got important things to talk about. Just because the overwhelming majority of Americans happen to be Christian, we've got important things to talk about. Now, I'm happy to say they have a very active areas of New Testament studies that are incorporated into the rabbinic curriculum, because people understand it. It's important to understand the people among whom we're living. But so my answer to you is go forth and start something.
Thank you.
Just in response to the last two questions, because I think this is vitally important. In the strategic plan that's about to be unfolded for the college. One of the elements for that plan is the college's now firm commitment to interreligious dialogue. And so we're researching now a Catholic-Muslim dialogue that we hope to roll out in the next year. And what we foresee, I hope, from at least coming out of the Center for Catholic and Dominican Studies, is a Catholic Jewish-Muslim dialogue event within the next few years. So where did he just go? Because I want your name. And I'll be reaching out to Dr. Keating. I've already mentioned something, I think, to her. But I think we're on the cusp of something great here, as long as we don't lose steam. And I think the kinds of things that you mentioned, people get motivated towards interreligious dialogue, they hit a plateau, and then it starts to dissipate. And I think we're at a point now where we want to kick it up a notch, and we can't let that fervor and that steam down. So I have your face, and I'll get your name. You're in trouble. But I would echo what you said, that if we're interested, we have to be able to vocalize the interest. And I just want to say there's a place here where we can actually do the dialogue. So
That is very encouraging. I would add that I would hope that in addition to having venues here, that you work to find venues out in the larger community that will, some people just will feel uncomfortable coming onto the campus here.
we will now.
But what you're doing is, it's so important.
A number of people who are involved in interreligious dialogue have remarked to me that it can never be just an intellectual activity, that a lot of it is about human relationship, and that being able to establish a relationship with your dialogue partner is an essential first step before you can even engage in dialogue. Can you say a little bit about those kind of relationships over the years that have been beneficial or challenging?
Yes, I'm going to say something. And this really applies to interfaith dialogue, although you're going to laugh. For the last 8 years, I've been meeting almost weekly with a young Lubavitch rabbi, who happens to be the Lubavitch rabbi, the Hasidic rabbi in Barrington. He's actually around my son's age. He gave me a call when he moved into town and said he'd like to study with me. And I said, I come from a very, very different perspective than you do. I mean, a very different perspective. I said, I believe every word of the Torah is sacred because it's a reflection of my ancestors' ongoing wrestling with God. But I don't believe a single syllable is divinely given. And he responded, I think we disagree about a lot of things, and that's just why we should talk about it. Since we've been meeting for 8 years, I've come to know him very well. I've spent time in his house. I've been involved at celebrations for the birth of the first 4 of his children. I say the first 4. He and his wife, between them, they have 20 siblings. I find myself, because of our personal relationship, when I'm with my more liberal colleagues who are bashing the Chabad movement for one reason or another, I let them have it. And when he's with his Hasidic colleagues talking about that idol-worshiping atheist, me, he lets them have it. Because my relationship with him is very much enhanced by the sights and the sounds of his children, who very often are crawling around as we're having our text study. So, and the same goes with, I use this because sometimes, as I said earlier, our no tradition is monolithic. Sometimes the most important interfaith dialogue you can have is between one aspect of your own religious group and another. So that's absolutely essential. Yeah.
I know that you started out talking about how first in Barrington, you sort of assumed that Christians would say otherwise.
Quickly. Very quickly did I learn otherwise.
And I have learned over the years that different Christian groups come to their appreciation of Christ in different ways. They have some have baptism of birth, some have born again. My question to you is on the Jewish side. Do you think that you have to believe in God to be Jewish?
Oh, I can answer that without any fear of contradiction. No. I have when some of you might remember Daniel Pearl, who was beheaded in Pakistan, and his parents wrote a book on I am a Jew, because the last words he said is, yes, I'm a Jew, and before he was beheaded. And it has 147 different definitions of who a Jew is. And some of them are kind of ridiculous. I am a Jew because I got a lot of presents for my bat mitzvah in Miami. To very profound explanations of the sources of their Jewish identity. Many very important people in the history of the Jewish people, like David Ben-Gurion, for example, claims to be non-religious. In fact, early Zionism was very often an anti-religious movement. The early Zionists, many of them, if they had a religion, it was socialism. So and here's, I can't speak for Christianity or any other religion, but there are many Jews for whom the Jewish religion is a minor or non-existent part of their identity. I'm going just this Friday for the weekend. I'll be at the Yiddish Book Center, and they're having a program on Yiddish, the Yiddish language in the Soviet Union in the 1920s. And most of these writers made a big effort to assimilate into the atheistic Soviet culture. So there's there's just abundant evidence. The problem then comes, can you be a religious Jew and not believe in God? And I would say, probably not. But what does it mean to believe in God? And of course, I would bet, looking around who's ever left in the room now, there was as many definitions of what it means to believe in God as there are people sitting here. I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Yeah?
It's not uncommon for Jews to feel uncomfortable with Christians, and there are sometimes good reasons. Historically, anti-Semitism, in today's world, fear of intermarriage, and just people's natures to be troubled, to be with people like themselves. What would your advice be to Jews to climb this mountain of interfaith dialogue and reach out to our Christian neighbors?
This goes to all of you who are here, whatever your religious background, or if you have no religious background. Once you become secure in your own identity, if you're secure in your own identity, your identity can only be enhanced by learning from others. My sense of Jewish religious identity has been greatly enhanced by the ministers and the priests, particularly Father Edward Flannery, whom I had the great honor to know, get to know quite well. even though we disagreed on all kinds of things, profoundly. And he didn't take disagreement lightly. But if you're secure in your own identity, you can only learn and grow from being exposed to other points of view. And I go back, while many people, for all kinds of reasons, disagree with me, my experience as a finite human being is that I can never get to that top of that mountain. That it's because I am finite and the God is infinite. So there's a disconnect. I can get a glimpse or a partial glimpse of the point, and that's what keeps me climbing. For as many years as I have left, I'll continue to climb, and I'm not afraid.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks to all of you for coming. Thanks to Rabbi Rosenberg for inspiring our dialogue this evening. Our next event will be in March 23rd. Please mark your calendars. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, once again, the yellow pad on the table there is screaming, write your name in